Today, I have a very special guest. She is an entrepreneur, an investor, a startup advisor, and a friend. My guest is the amazing Rachel Fisher. Rachel, thanks so much for joining the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Shahan. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. So, Rachel, I want to start off because you have such a great background. You're involved in so many different things. Like I said, venture capital as an angel investor. You're a tech entrepreneur with a major exit. So I just wanted to know, give us some more details about your background. How did your career start, and what have you been up to since your startup exit?
Yeah. So a lot of entrepreneurs have stories about having been an entrepreneur from the time they were born, and they were starting businesses when they were in elementary school. I'm not that person.
Mm.
I really didn't think I was going to be an entrepreneur. My goal when I was a little girl was to be, Jane Goodall. Or some other field biologist. When I got older, I really wanted to be E.O. Wilson, who a lot of people don't know, but he studied ants and island biogeography and evolution and all of that cool Pacific Island Darwin kind of stuff. And I really loved that. So the only thing I really have in common with a lot of, you know, born entrepreneurial folks is that I didn't picture a traditional path of, going on to a white collar job in a corporate setting.
Right.
I got off the academic train after finishing pretty much all of my master's in oceanography when I realized that I was not the kind of person who wanted to study one thing very deeply for a long period of time,
Mm.
that I really needed more variety. So I stepped away from academia and had the first now what moment of my life. Not sure what to do when you've been driven in one direction for a very long time, and then you step aside and decide to do something else. So I taught school. I had always worked with kids as my summer job, educational camps.
Mm.
And shortly thereafter, my husband and mother-in-law started a business. My husband is one of those born and bred entrepreneurs, and he dragged me into it. Now, he said, "Why don't you join us?" And I jumped in, and I found out that I was really meant to be an entrepreneur and to enjoy the world of business.
Mm.
The analytical mind that I had from science translates over really well in business.
Mm.
So that's how I got started. Um, since our exit, that's really interesting because when you exit, no one kind of prepares you. Everyone's talking about the glamour and the recognition, and no one says to you, and by the way, you also just sold your job.
Right.
Um, and my husband and I were in business together. So when you both sell your job, it's a real now what moment. Often you have a non-compete in your space, which you might have been in for a while.
Mm.
So there can be a real sense of soul searching and what to do. One thing I did do was decide to go back to school. I enrolled at Wharton to get my MBA because I didn't have the formal background in finance and business,
Mm.
and felt that in order to be taken seriously, in order to have credibility, and in fact to have the knowledge base that I needed to do bigger and better things, I really should, get a serious education. So I've been working on that. I graduate in May. I
Awesome.
can't wait.
Congrats. Yeah.
Thank you. 2 years is a long time, but it's been a fantastic experience. And then in between, I think my path is very indicative of the whole I don't know what to do with myself, because I started several businesses. Some I shuttered, some are up and running. I have jumped into venture capital and spent about a year in venture capital, in
Mm.
charge of deal flow for Florida funders. And I've also done a lot of advising, as you mentioned, with mostly ed tech companies, but also some other startups. It's been a very what's the next career path kind of moment for me.
Right. No, and I think that's great. And I actually had a similar experience in that I thought I was going to go to law school, become a sports agent, and life kind of takes you a different path, and you experience new things and you find out new things about yourself. You develop yourself, you reinvent yourself. And I love what you're doing in terms of going back to school, adding new skill sets to your arsenal, and then going out and doing it again. So I think that's really interesting, and kind of segueing on that, given that you've been an advisor to different startups, you've been an investor, you have had a successful exit. What advice can you give to new entrepreneurs that want to scale and eventually exit their company? Like, what challenges you mentioned? You lose your job afterwards, but like, what challenges do you do as you're scaling the company? And then, what are some of the best practices or lessons learned that you learned throughout the journey?
Sure. So I would say that the most important thing when you hit a point that you need to scale is getting really great people.
Hmm.
That is the challenge of all businesses, big and small. Today, we have a very tight labor market. Talent is at a premium, but it's always true. It makes a huge difference if you have the right people on your team, people with the right skills, people who are a cultural fit. And you have to be careful not to use comfort as a proxy for culture.
Right.
It's not just that you want to hang out with people who are like you and think like you, because that won't make your business the best that it can be.
Hmm.
But you do want people who are aligned with your mission and your values and your purpose. That's really important. So finding great people is a challenge, but it's also the thing that is most important when you're trying to scale. Also, I would say that you need great people, not just internally but externally, advisors and mentors.
Hmm.
You're always going to be guided by what you believe is most important. You make the decisions at the end of the day, but having someone else to bounce your ideas off of and who've gone ahead of you. I was listening to an audiobook where someone mentioned you always want to have people who are much more accomplished than you are in your sort of circle of mentors and advisors,
Right.
because they're where you want to get to. So it is really important that as you grow, you keep growing your network to include people who are far ahead of you, who are willing to, spend some time and give you advice. Um, Otherwise, there's plenty of pitfalls to entrepreneurship. Being in business is really tough. I had to learn the hard way. I was very focused on detail, product. I like to get into the nitty gritty of cost savings, and really, what you have to do is drive revenue.
Hmm.
Revenue, 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 revenue. Revenue solves all problems.
Right.
It's like, when a team is winning, and so that everyone, they have great chemistry and everything's awesome, and when a team is losing, suddenly that chemistry disappears even when it's the same people.
Right.
um, Revenue solves all ills, and understanding that you have to keep the lights on long enough for opportunity to show up. That's the most important thing.
Hmm. And the exit that you did and the startup success you had was in the education field. And I think that you can look at this in different ways, but in some ways the education system is broken, and there are some improvements that need to be made. And I'm curious, going specific and narrow within education, what are, to new entrepreneurs in this space, what are some of the biggest challenges the education industry is seeing? And if you had any advice in where people should focus, where should education leaders or entrepreneurs focus on to fix these major problems?
Sure. So, having been a teacher, I have a big heart for the incredible number of people in the space who really do come to work to try to make children, families, and communities stronger every day.
Hmm.
Uh, the education space gets painted with a pretty broad brush, when the interesting thing about education is it's highly decentralized. It's one of the things that makes it most difficult
Hmm.
to sell. And by education here, I'm talking mostly K-12, although higher ed has the same situation. um, Selling into the space is really difficult because you can't sell like one entity and have them adopt something across a wide swath. You have to literally go school district to school district,
Right.
because they each make their own decisions. And even from there, they're a decentralized organization. You have a central office, but most people actually work in their individual schools.
Hmm.
So principals have a lot of autonomy, teachers have a lot of autonomy. So when you're selling into the space, you really have to understand how it's structured, because that's very different from most other spaces, and it makes it a little bit of a challenge. Um, at the same time, I would say there's a narrative that the education space and the people who work within it are anti-technology, that they are averse to change. I didn't find that at all. Individual to individual, sure, but not as a whole.
Hmm.
The main thing is, like in all businesses, know your customer. If you're selling to the school district for them to use your tools, make sure you know them. Don't come in from the outside having very little experience in the space. I have a blog post I've never actually pushed the button to publish, that I want to at some point, where I say stop saying disruptive. Like,
Hmm.
stop using the term disruptive. Disruptive, if most people remember, is actually a negative word.
Hmm.
And when people are doing things like taking care of the nation's children, the word disruptive makes them nervous. Um, So come with positivity, come with the idea that they are open to change. You just need to work with them. The main thing that does concern me is that, and this is outside of, necessarily the entrepreneur's control, is there going to be enough finance for the innovation that needs to take place in K-12? It's a small market by venture capital standards. There are only about 13,600 school districts in the entire country. And what works in the United States does not necessarily automatically translate to other countries. So you kind of have to look at the US market as your total addressable market, your TAM. And it's relatively small for most things. Venture capital is looking for things that have $1 billion total addressable market. It's hard to get a product there in K-12. It's one of the reasons venture capital did some investing into K-12 and is still investing in K-12, but less and less so. And it's kind of specialized funds are still focused on that, but the more generalized funds that were doing some ed tech investing have kind of pulled back. And I think it's because of that market scale, and also the time it takes to sell individual school districts is kind of an eye opener for people who are used to being able to scale SaaS products quickly. So I worry that where the funding is going to come from, because you do need innovation. We do need to see tons of experimentation. We need to see people have a space where they can experiment with different models. You're starting to see that just because of choice. More people are homeschooling their children. There's more options to go entirely online. There's more models out there.
Right.
So it's starting to break up just because parents are saying, hey, I have a choice and I'm going to do something different with my kids. But on the grand scale, in a more formal way, I think that there needs to be some source of innovation funding for K-12 that doesn't require $1 billion TAM in order to entice, someone into that funding. So that's kind of my main thing that I have my eye on in the space.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. And after you were in the education space, you moved over speaking, to what you just spoke about is you went over to investments, and specifically in Florida, to look at these companies in the education space as well as other industries as well. And when I went to Florida, you were a great, gracious host, and you took us to all the great the places in Florida. I was amazed and blown away by the innovation and the startups that were there and the momentum that I was seeing in the region. And you were the VP of Investment Ops at Florida Funders, which is focusing on Florida-based companies that are trying to break into the scene in various different industries. So from your perspective, what is unique about Florida? And then what excites you most about the momentum that you are seeing in the startup scene?
Yeah, so what's not unique about Florida? Florida gets a bad rap. It's been my home for about 20 years. I moved from the Northeast, and there's a lot to be excited about in Florida. One of the things about Florida is there's a ton of capital in Florida. Because so much of the Northeast makes Florida a second home, or makes Florida a primary home for tax purposes. It is a place where there's plenty of money to be had, but most of that has traditionally been tied up in real estate investment. So the challenge of people trying to sort of supercharge the startup environment is to engage those investors who are used to a different type of investment in innovation, finance innovation. So you're starting to see more and more of that. People are starting to have a better understanding of how venture capital works and what it does, and the benefit to the community. I think what we really see is that people who love Florida and live there and want to see it thrive, they see Silicon Valley and they see the cascade effect that when money is applied and companies get funding and they grow and they exit, they create new, millionaires, new people who are going to invest in that next round of funding, new entrepreneurs who are going to spin out from the company they just were at and start a new one. And it grows from there. And I think anyone alive today recognizes that being a center for technology innovation is a really important way to grow as a 21st century city or state. So Florida has been, whether it's government or local groups, really been pushing for that. So In the Tampa Bay area, I've seen, when I started my business in the early 2000s, there was no capital. uh, it didn't even occur to you really to go to Silicon Valley and get capital, or at least I wasn't paying enough attention. There was no capital, so you ate what you killed, and you grew on revenue, which is
Which is great in some ways. I mean, I
it's
think there's like way too much waste when it comes to capital being dumped, and people think that that's an alternative to generating revenue, which is where company needs to go anyways, right?
Yeah, I mean, people really get confused about the purpose of business. And the purpose of business is to produce something that solves a problem that's pervasive enough and painful enough that lots and lots of people will pay to solve that problem.
Mm,
And that's really the sort of the purpose of business as I know it. And so if you can't get people to pay you, then something's wrong there.
mm,
That doesn't mean that some of the models you see don't require a ton of capital to get going. Anything that's going to be, B2C, D2C, biotech, the capital heavy stuff, biotech, hardware, infrastructure, like somebody needs to throw a bunch of money at that in the outset, and it's not going to be profitable for a while. And you just know that's the model in those spaces. But there's plenty of businesses that either are not intended to be venture scale that should grow with revenue or traditional funding, or venture scale is the start, but at some point you're looking for revenue, and people should be able to see you start generating enough revenue to have a path to profitability, even if you're not profitable right away. In our case, we had to generate enough revenue to sustain ourselves, and we grew, and we're small and slow. I think we should have raised money sooner
mm.
than we did at the end of the day when we finally did. But the fact that revenue was available towards the tail end of our company shows you the change in Florida. We had a new entrepreneurship center at the University of Tampa where I did a pitch like that had never happened in our area before.
Mm.
I think we were only the second or third pitch to ever take place there.
Wow.
Um, and there have been some real efforts. There's a big conference called Synapse that draws this year 6,000 people from across the state, investors and startup companies to get together. And when we looked at the Tampa Bay area, we had something like 70 incubators and accelerators. I mean, we obviously have to coordinate better, but there's no lack of trying in terms of supporting the entrepreneurial ecosystem. It's still small, it's still nascent. We don't have decades of this under our belt and have it mature like it is in Silicon Valley, but there's a lot of excitement and energy happening there.
Right. And speaking about kind of the investment landscape, venture capital more broadly, I know you and I have had many discussions on this topic. I feel like we're seeing a lot of irresponsible investing over the last few years, or people are throwing money at things that, to your point, they may not have a path to profitability, or, they're not sound business models. I certainly saw that in the blockchain and crypto space where somebody has a white paper, they don't even have a business model. How do you make money? They have no idea, right? But because there was so much money coming into the space, people were just spraying money all over the place, thinking something would hit. So, and do you think that venture is going through a change right now? Are you tracking any new forms or methodologies for investing?
Interesting questions. I do think that, some of what we see as irresponsible investing, I think is just directly related to how much capital there is in the system.
Mm,
There's more capital in, the global markets than there ever has been in human history. And really that's a result of this excessively large generation, the baby boomer generation that dominated, the developed world. And this generation grew more wealth and invested more in public markets than any prior generation. So we have, I don't know, I read an estimate which may be overblown that the boomers in the United States will have 15 trillion in wealth by 2035,
wow. Okay.
which the US GDP is 19 trillion. So that tells you that there's a lot of wealth, and it's kind of slushing around without many places to go. We have a low interest rate environment. There's not a lot of places for investors to get like an asymmetrical upside. So you see a lot more money flowing into private equity and venture capital than may traditionally have done so in the past.
Mm,
So I think you've got a combination of too much capital. Like when you have $1 billion fund, you can't cut $5 million checks.
mm,
And when you have to deploy $1 billion in 3 years, you're going to cut some big checks to some stuff that just may not turn out. And then secondarily, you have a lot of people coming into venture capital that are not familiar with how venture capital works. Venture capital is a very specific form of funding. It is not intended. It is about asymmetric upside, like, only. It's not intended to drive medium returns. And everyone knows that venture capital portfolios that have been successful tend to have one or two giant outlier wins, and everything else is either, zombie or zero. So it's very binary most of the time. And I think there's investors coming in who don't know that, and so they might make mistakes because they're not allocating with that in mind. And there's LPs coming in that, invest in these funds, who maybe don't know how ventures really, and it's long term as well. Like, funds have 10-year lifespans. So I think people get the idea, if they're going to, invest in a venture capital fund or angel invest, that in 3 years it's going to exit and it's going to be Uber. And, that's not really, that's a very glamorized, unrealistic tale of what happens. I do see a lot of the rise of alternative lending. I'm really interested in the rise of alternatives, because venture is not a fit for most companies. And people say, oh, only 2% of companies seeking funding get venture capital. That's probably appropriate. Should it be more distributed from a diversity standpoint? Of course. But there shouldn't be many companies. There are not many companies that can have the kind of outsized upside as, an Uber or, any of the unicorns that you can think of. So knowing that there aren't many companies for whom that is a fit, where they need a ton of capital to supercharge them to be multi-billion-dollar, what does everybody else do? And it used to be that what everybody else did was either get bank lending or get lending from friends and family, and those were their only choices. So if you're not suitable for bank lending, if you're not bankable, if your family and friends don't happen to have tens of thousands to just lend you on hand, what do you do? And you're starting to see some more options. There's more things like, there's a million of them, these lending sources. They are expensive money. They're much more expensive than bank loans. A bank loan you can get, 5% annually. We're talking about loans and working capital where they're going to charge you 2%, 4% a month. So it can be 24% over a year, 48% over a year. That's expensive money, but it's something. And for companies that can generate revenue, it's an option that maybe they didn't have before. So I think you're starting to see more of that. And then you see really interesting options like ClearBank. If you can go to ClearBank, they have the 20-minute term sheet. And if you can go to ClearBank and say, hey, we have a model, and when we put this much money into marketing, we get this much revenue out, they're like, here you go. Not to speak for them, but that's a great model. So why give away equity in your company just because you need to feed a marketing machine? That doesn't make any sense. That's not bringing you an equity investor who's bringing significant value, unless they are literally helping drive your marketing strategy.
That's a great point.
So you see stuff like that as well.
And moving from investing to maybe particular industries, I know you always try to keep yourself educated on the new industries that are emerging. What are you kind of tracking right now? I know, you've spent some time in ed tech, obviously, blockchain, healthcare. Are there trends or innovations that you think have a promising future?
Yes. So I definitely think 2020 is the year that fintech and blockchain kind of explode into the general public consciousness. So not that ed tech and healthcare is a whole thing, and is definitely on fire and being funded like crazy. That's going to be heavily driven by the boomers as well. 1/4 of Americans are boomers, and they're going to need healthcare over the next 15 years at a level that's kind of unprecedented. So we're going to see huge advancements in healthcare. But fintech is like interesting to me because everyone has known that ed tech and health tech need revamped, heavily revamped. They need disrupted, they need innovated, they need changed. But it's only in the last few years that significant advances in, hey, like fintech is equally archaic and antiquated, and like, just try and pay somebody who works in another country. Like, you'll just,
yeah.
like, just trying to send a check.
It
It's bonkers how difficult that is. And so as the world has globalized, the financial system really hasn't from a technology standpoint, and we know that needs to change. So I think this year we're starting to see a lot of investments, and you're starting to see some of the earlier fintechs come into more maturity. They're getting into later stages, and you're seeing the growth of blockchain and cryptocurrency. And the main thing for me with blockchain and cryptocurrency is seeing how it's matured, that you really don't have this unsophisticated Wild West of money and, pump and dump and that kind of thing. That's not really what's going on anymore. You have sophisticated people. We have rules now and an understanding, not that it's not still changing, but, there are SEC rules, it's pretty clear what you do with some of these products. And you're starting to see real enterprise use cases and actual products. So instead of it being promised, now you have product and people can see how it can be utilized. I think that is, to me, the most exciting thing going on in 2020.
Yeah, I would 100% agree. I think the grown-ups have entered the room in blockchain and crypto.
Yeah.
There's regulations, like you said, and people are actually solving real business problems instead of just, tacking on the name blockchain on everything and saying this is going to be, the next revolutionary thing without having an actual way that's going to, increase efficiency, transparency, all those different things. Um,
Yes.
I think that, when I jumped into entrepreneurship, one of the things that, I found out pretty quickly is, in addition to figuring out how to grow your business, how to find different business models, how to find new partnerships, everything is on you. And because everything is on you, you need to work on yourself. And personal development has been a daily practice of mine, like every day, because if you're not right up here, and if you're not, one thing I need to do better is like exercising as well. But, I try to, keep my mind sharp and focused and positive. And I know that that's something that's extremely important. And I want to know, from your perspective, do you have any special like daily practices or books that you can recommend for the audience to read?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely an individual sport in a lot of ways. I mean, it's truly a team sport, but it feels, when you're leading the company, like so much is on you.
Right.
And I'm smiling, but it's the tears of a clown. Um,
Right.
it's really, really, really hard sometimes. You definitely, um, it helps. So to be totally transparent, I really struggled with anxiety. I think I had anxiety, maybe my whole life, but it was more of a background hum than like a blaring, siren of death.
Right.
And there have been times during entrepreneurship where it really turned up to, full imposter syndrome, full, what if I fail? What if I lose other people's money? What if the people I've hired lose their jobs? Like all of that responsibility and fear can really be debilitating. And to your point, if you're not right up here, you're not gonna be able to run your business. You're not gonna
Right.
be able to project the right things. And it's amazing. I used to think of this as kind of, woo-woo stuff of like, when you have the right energy, things in the universe come to you
Mm.
and things open up to you. And I really think it's mostly just that when you're open and you're feeling good, you can see all the good things that are around you.
Right.
And when you're not, when you're closed down and you're really scared, you look around and all you see are closed doors.
Mm.
So mindset is insanely important. And the other thing that I've learned is it's a practice, just like going to the gym and lifting weights to keep that muscle going. So for me, the practice has become daily meditation.
Mm.
And it's not that I never miss a day. A lot of what you have to do is forgive yourself for being imperfect too. But generally speaking, my days go much better when I start in the morning with a daily meditation. I often will do it again at the end of the day or sort of later in the day if I feel like my energy's too buzzy and too adrenaline and I need to center again and chill out. So that's been super helpful for me. You can lean on therapists, you can lean on mentors, you can lean on friends. Do that.
Mm.
Not dumping, but sharing. Find other people who are doing the same things you are in terms of stretching themselves as entrepreneurs and who get it,
100%.
and share share
Mm.
the challenge.
Right.
And then otherwise, educating yourself is great. So I love audiobooks, especially if you do any kind of traveling. Audiobooks are a great way to
Mm.
kind of fill the time with something useful. I tend to lean less towards books that are kind of 6 steps for improving X than towards biographies of
Mm.
interesting people. So, like, I really love Shoe Dog, Phil Knight's book. That's a tremendous book. It's an amazing look at an entrepreneur figuring stuff out as he goes.
Mm.
But he also is an amazing writer. So that's a great one. I read Alpha Girls, about 4 of the women pioneers in venture capital. That
Mm.
was an awesome story. Really inspiring, a little intimidating at what they managed and what they went through. But those kinds of things are really helpful. Interestingly, the combo book for me is Ben Horowitz's Hard Thing About Hard Things,
Yep.
because he starts with his story of survival during the economic downturn, which is brutal. I don't
Mm.
know how he didn't, throw himself off a bridge 7 times. It was pretty tough. And he emerged victorious. Good for him. And then the second half of the book is all these little tiny vignettes on specific things he thinks you can improve a business. So that's kind of nice, because you can literally like look at it as a library, like, oh, I'm hiring somebody new in this position. This is a helpful little tidbit.
Right.
So the combo book is kind of nice as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, reaching out and getting help from other people, and then building a practice that supports yourself in terms of self-care. It is important to eat well and sleep well. And if you think that you can burn the candle at both ends as your way to win, at some point you run out of steam. And so that's my advice anyway.
Yeah. So many of the things you said resonated with me. Like, one of the things you said was speak to people, surround yourself with people who are going through the same thing and stretching themselves, because I felt like it was maybe just personal to me, but when I picked up the phone and started talking to people, like, oh, I'm dealing with this, and I do this to deal with that, and it's just sometimes, even if what they're doing is not helpful to you, it's helpful to just hear them talk about it, because you're like, at least I'm not crazy, other people are going through this. And then daily meditation, that's certainly something I try to do a lot more now. And then reading the different books, I'll definitely check out some of the ones that you mentioned there. And I think another thing that you did, in addition to kind of the personal development, is you went back to school, right? And I
I
thought that was
did.
really interesting. Is you were very successful doing investing and your startup, but you said, I'm going to step up my game even a little bit more. And you're finishing up your MBA at Wharton. So what has your experience been like, and why did you go back to school?
Yeah, so it's been really, really, really amazing.
Hmm.
Really, really, really hard. Harder than I thought it was going to be. And they're pretty honest with you about how hard it's going to be. Now, the Wharton program, this is the executive MBA. So everyone in the program works full time
Hmm.
and has been in the work world for, 15 years or so. The great thing about the executive MBA is my classmates are all super accomplished and experienced across a really wide variety of industries.
Hmm.
So you get a perspective from being in class with those people that there's just no other way to replicate that I can possibly imagine. Being able to ask people with deep experience in, the military and security and technology and healthcare in every industry. And to have their firsthand experiences, like you said, where it really resonates, even if you're not doing the same thing, to hear
Right.
someone talk about what they've gone through. To be honest, I thought that I needed it because I needed the knowledge, like I said, but I also felt that I wouldn't be taken seriously as a potential, woman executive.
Hmm.
Um, when I was used to being in charge of a company, but it was a small company. And when we were acquired by a larger company, I was kind of placed in middle management. And that was a very frustrating layer in the layer cake for me. It felt like a lot of accountability with little control. So it's a challenge. And I really wanted to be at the big kids table again. I didn't think that I could get there with my history and my knowledge without growing. So I started looking at MBAs. I was in the Philadelphia area at the time, and my husband said, "You should look at Wharton." And I said, "I can't get into Wharton." I was like, "Get the heck out of here! I can't get into Wharton. That's funny. You're funny." And he was like, "No, seriously, you should look at Wharton." And then I really thought about it, and I started. I walked up to the bottom of that mountain, and I looked up, and I said, okay. We're gonna do it. Let's do it. Let's try and do it for real. And it's been a long time, because you have to study for the GMAT. I had never studied it for 20 years. I hadn't studied like
Hmm.
that. So to get ready for a test that's an adaptive test that fails you on purpose,
Hmm.
it's a demoralizing experience. um, but when I cross that hurdle, and you cross each hurdle, and you get so much from it, the network and the support that I have and what I've learned, the amount that I've learned, it's like I definitely need like at least a week off after I graduate so my brain can like melt out my ears and then reconstitute itself. But what an amazing learning experience. And it's been really good to stretch myself. I'm in my early 40s, to stretch myself at this age, because your brain is a little less plastic than it was when you were younger. You have to work a little harder to get new information in there and assimilate it. And I think it's a good reminder that, much like, you know, your meditation practice is working a muscle, and going to the gym and lifting a weight is working a muscle, learning new things is working a muscle. And in the modern economy, everybody has to do it. You have to keep upskilling. It doesn't have to be a Wharton MBA, but you have to keep upskilling. So whatever you can do without driving yourself nuts,
Hmm.
keep feeding your curiosity. You know, when you go down a rabbit hole online about a technology or a leader or you know, a transaction that took place that interests you, follow that instinct and keep learning is what I would say.
Yeah, I love that. And just as we're wrapping up, first of all, I would like to say this has been my favorite podcast with you, Rachel. Uh,
I'm sure.
McAfee was the most shocking podcast, but
I'm
this is,
glad I'm not more
yeah,
shocking than McAfee.
yeah, I think a little too shocking. But just to wrap up, are there any, you know, updates or events that you like the audience to be made aware of that are coming up? You know, anything that you're kind of tracking?
Um, so events are like, I'm terrible with,
Mhm.
with keeping up with events. I mostly just follow when I see a crowd of cool people headed in a direction. Like, where are you going? Oh, you're going, that's a conference? Oh, I hope I can still register. So I'm a little behind on my event, either creation or tracking. I do think that paying attention, I have committed to the Twitter. There's not, not that there's anything wrong with Twitter. I just was really not a part of it for a long, long time. And a lot of what's going on in startup and venture capital, there's a lot of conversation there. There's plenty that's not useful, but there's a lot that really
How do
is
we follow
useful.
you? What's your name on Twitter?
Oh my goodness. I think it's R Fisher 2121.
We'll make
But
sure to put that.
I will look it up and tell you.
Mhm.
But yeah, I am not a font. I've actually done more blogging and stuff on LinkedIn, but I'm starting to, yes, I'm R Fisher 2121.
Okay.
I'm starting to actually push that stuff over to Twitter and have more conversations with people on Twitter as well, and seeing the value of being able to do that quickly and in real time. So that's something that I'm spending more time doing these days and seeing the value of. Um, Otherwise, I think that it's all fascinating. Every technology event that I go to, it's really interesting. They're all blending into each other. Like, I
Mm.
have not been to see a single speaker in any space who has not somehow said, we're becoming a payments company. That's why I think
Right.
fintech is all about 2022. Like, you go to a company that's a marketplace and they're like, we're becoming a payments company. And you go to a company that's an ed tech company and they're like, we're becoming a payments company. And you go to a healthcare company and they're like, we're becoming a payments company. And, you know, the race is on to serve the unbanked, the underbanked. That's a lot of, you're going to see a lot of stuff about supporting them, supporting the gig worker.
Mm.
Um, so, you know, it's interesting. You can go to any tech event and you can see like these fascinating things starting to weave together, you know, across industries. They're not staying in their separate little silos anymore.
Mm. Awesome. Make sure to follow Rachel on Twitter, on LinkedIn. Make sure to subscribe to my channel, the On with Shahan channel. Rachel, thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Thank
And
you.
I hope to be doing this again soon.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun. Thanks so much, Shahan. Have a good one.
All right.